60 meters from the Eagle, Neil Armstrong stopped. He turned away from Buzz Aldrin, away from the cameras, and walked alone toward a small crater. Houston watched the suit telemetry scroll past. No one asked him what he was doing. For a few minutes, the most photographed man alive stood with his back to the world, looking down. He never told Mission Control. He never told his crewmates. He never told his wife. But his sister did say something once, and what she said has haunted the Armstrong family for 50 years. To understand why a man would walk away from the cameras on the surface of the moon, you have to go back 7 years and 4 months. You have to leave the Sea of Tranquility and go to a small frame house in Juniper Hills, California. You have to picture a desert wind, a swing set in the yard, and a 2-year-old girl named Karen Anne Armstrong. Her father called her Muffy. He was a Navy combat pilot turned test pilot, flying the X-15 at the edge of space, Mach 6, 200,000 feet, the cold ceiling of the Earth. The Soviets had just put Yuri Gagarin into orbit. America was losing the race. John Glenn was being fitted for his pressure suit. The country was looking up. Neil Armstrong was looking down at his daughter, who had begun to stumble. This is the story he never told. The story of what he lost before he ever climbed into a capsule. A private grief inside a public race, and a small crater on the moon, and what may or may not still be there. Some called him cold, some called him distant, some called him the most controlled man they had ever met. They didn't know. His own crewmates didn't know. His mother said Neil grieved on the inside, where no one could see. He was a small-town boy from Wapakoneta, Ohio. Population about 8,000. His father audited county records. His mother played the church organ. As a child, Neil cut grass for 10 cents an hour to save for flying lessons. He earned his pilot's license at 16, before he could legally drive a car. Korea took him at 21. He flew 78 combat missions off the carrier Essex. A wire fence strung between 2 hills at low altitude tore 6 feet off his right wing. He brought the plane home. He came back quieter than he left. In 1956, he married a sharp, red-headed young woman from suburban Chicago named Janet Sheeran. They were married on the 28th of January, in a small ceremony. They moved west, to the high desert of California, to a cabin in Juniper Hills with no indoor plumbing and a long view of the San Gabriel Mountains. Neil was flying test aircraft at Edwards Air Force Base, the most dangerous job in American aviation. Their son Rick was born in 1957. And in April of 1959, on a clear spring day, their daughter Karen arrived. Blonde, blue-eyed, easy laugh. Neil, who almost never showed emotion, would take her out to the porch in the evening and point at the stars. She would reach for them with her small hands. The summer of 1961 was the hottest anyone in Juniper Hills could remember. Karen was 2. She had begun to talk in long, surprising sentences. She loved to climb. One afternoon she was running across the yard and fell, and could not quite stand back up. Janet caught it first. A small wobble, a slight crossing of the eyes, a pause where her balance used to be. They took her to a doctor in Los Angeles. He said the word that no parent ever wants to hear: a malignant tumor at the base of the brainstem. In 1961, there was no surgery. There was no real treatment. There was only time and the slow theft of everything a child can do. The doctor gave them weeks, perhaps months. Janet wept in the parking lot. Neil walked back to the car in silence. That evening, he drove home through the desert, the radio off. He did not cry. He did not speak. He started X-ray treatments for her the next week. He went back to work at Edwards. He flew. And he came back, and he held his daughter. They tried cobalt radiation. They tried prayer. They tried a Christian Science healer Janet's mother sent for. Nothing worked. Karen's right side began to weaken. She could not walk. She could not lift her arm. Then she could not speak. The neighbors brought casseroles and left them on the porch and did not knock. Out at Edwards, the test pilots knew. They did not say a word to Neil. They simply made sure he was on the flight schedule. Flying was the one place where he could not think about her. While Karen was dying in California, the Soviets were putting German Titov into a 17-orbit flight. The Berlin Wall was going up, stone by stone. President Kennedy was telling Congress that America would put a man on the moon before the decade was out. The country was at full sprint. Neil Armstrong was carrying his daughter from the car to the house because she could no longer walk. By Christmas of 1961, she could no longer see. They put up a small tree. Neil sat with her in the rocking chair for hours, reading her stories she could no longer follow. Put up a small tree. Neil sat with her in the rocking chair for hours, reading her stories she could no longer follow. Janet later said he did not sleep for nights at a stretch. He just rocked, and he did not weep where anyone could see. On the 28th of January, 1962, Neil and Janet's 6th wedding anniversary, Karen died. She was 2 years, 9 months, and 15 days old. Pneumonia brought on by the tumor. The funeral was small. They buried her in Wapakoneta, in the Armstrong family plot, under a small white stone. Neil stayed for the service. He shook hands. He said almost nothing. 3 weeks later, John Glenn orbited the Earth 3 times in a tin can called Friendship 7. The country erupted. Neil watched the broadcast in his living room with Janet, in silence. Then he stood up and went back to work. 2 weeks after Karen died, he was back at Edwards. Within months, he was back in the cockpit of the X-15. 4 months after his daughter's funeral, he sat down at the kitchen table and filled out an application to a new program in Houston. They were looking for astronauts. The deadline was the 1st of June. Janet said nothing. She knew her husband. She knew that the only way he was going to survive his daughter's death was to climb higher than the grief could follow. He sent the application in. He did not tell anyone why. For the next 7 years, Neil Armstrong did not speak of Karen. Not to his crewmates, not to his closest friends. When new colleagues at NASA met his family and saw 2 boys, Rick and a new baby named Mark, born in 1963, they assumed 2 children. He did not correct them. His brother Dean said the only time he ever saw Neil break was a few weeks after the funeral, in the kitchen. Neil was washing a dish, and he set it down, and he put his hand on the counter, and he stayed there for a long time. Then he picked the dish back up. His sister June said something else. She said Neil grew quieter after Karen. Not colder, just farther away, as if a part of him had gone somewhere and not come back. In December of 1968, Apollo 8 read Genesis from lunar orbit. America wept in front of black and white televisions. The race was almost won. And Neil Armstrong, now 38 years old, the commander of Apollo 11, sat in his backyard in Alago, Texas, and tossed a baseball with his sons. Janet asked him one evening what he wanted to take with him. He thought about it. He did not answer. On the 20th of July, 1969, at 10:56 in the evening Eastern Time, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the Sea of Tranquility. The world watched. 650 million people, every continent, every language. He said his line. He took the soil samples. He set up the flag. Buzz Aldrin joined him on the surface, and they went to work, laying out the experiments, taking the photographs, checking the boots for tears. They had 2 hours and 31 minutes. Every second was scheduled. Every step was planned. And then, near the end, Neil did something not on the timeline. He turned. He walked away from Buzz, away from the lander, away from the cameras. He covered 60 meters at a slow, bouncing pace, alone. He stopped at the rim of a small crater the geologists later called Little West. He looked down into it. He took a few photographs. He stood there, by himself, for what some accounts say was almost 3 minutes. Houston did not interrupt. Buzz did not call out. Whatever Neil did at the edge of that crater, no camera caught it. Years after he died in 2012, his sister June Hoffman gave a quiet interview. The interviewer asked her whether her brother had left anything for Karen on the moon. June Hoffman paused. Then she said, and these are the only words on the record, "I dearly hope he did." There is no proof. There is no photograph. Neil Armstrong never confirmed it. In interviews, when asked, he would smile a small smile and change the subject. His biographer, James Hansen, pressed him once. Neil looked away and said only that some things were private. Over the years, the stories accumulated. A small bracelet with her name on it. A photograph. A simple silver tag. The details vary depending on who is telling it. Some accounts say nothing was left at all. What is true is this. Neil Armstrong walked, alone, to the edge of a small crater on the surface of the moon. He stood there. He bent at one point, you can see it in the suit telemetry, and the bend is not on any checklist. And when he returned to the lander, the mission continued, and he never explained, and no one asked him again. He flew home. He shook hands with presidents. He retired from NASA 2 years later and moved back to Ohio. He taught engineering at the University of Cincinnati. He raised cattle on a farm in Lebanon. He did not give speeches. He did not write a memoir. When his hometown opened a museum in his name, he asked them, please, not to make too much of it. He died on the 25th of August, 2012, of complications from heart surgery. He was 82. The family kept the funeral small. There was a story his older son Rick told once, of his father walking out to the porch on summer evenings in Ohio, the same way he had with Karen all those years before. He would stand there, hands in his pockets, and look up. Rick said his father never pointed at the stars. He just looked, as if he were checking on something, as if he were keeping a promise. If you remember where you were on the 20th of July, 1969, when the eagle came down at the Sea of Tranquility, tell us in the comments. And subscribe. There are more quiet legends still waiting to be told.